Before we begin our journey through the ancient fields of forgotten civilizations, take a moment to settle in. Find your comfortable position. Let the tensions of the day drift away. If you enjoy these peaceful explorations through history, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And now, let yourself be carried back through time to an age when humanity first learned to coax sustenance from the soil. The dawn of agriculture. You stand at the edge of a vast plain, 10,000 years before the present moment. The sun rises slowly over grasslands that stretch to the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. The air is cool, carrying the scent of wild grasses and distant rain. This is the world before agriculture, before cities, before written history. This is the world that is about to change forever. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors moved across landscapes like these, following the migrations of animals, gathering what nature provided freely. They knew every edible plant, every seasonal fruiting, every water source. They lived lightly on the earth, taking only what they needed, moving on before resources were exhausted. It was a life that required profound knowledge, constant movement, and intimate connection with the natural world. But something is shifting. Perhaps it began with women noticing that seeds dropped near campsites sprouted into familiar plants the following year. Perhaps it started with the observation that certain grasses grew more abundantly where people had disturbed the soil. Perhaps it was simply the accumulated wisdom of thousands of generations, watching, learning, experimenting. Whatever the catalyst, humanity is about to cross an invisible threshold. You are about to witness the Neolithic Revolution, the agricultural revolution, the moment when people stopped simply gathering their food and began to grow it. The transformation did not happen in a single moment or in a single place. Across the globe, in at least 7 independent centers, people began the long, patient work of domestication. In the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, in the river valleys of China, in the highlands of Mesoamerica, in the mountains of New Guinea, in the Ethiopian highlands, in West Africa's Sahel, and in the eastern woodlands of North America, the same profound shift was occurring. Humanity was becoming tied to the land in a way it had never been before. The earliest evidence of this transformation comes from a region we now call the Fertile Crescent, a sweeping arc of land stretching from the Persian Gulf through modern-day Iraq and Syria, curving down through the Levant to the edge of Egypt. Here, around 10,000 BCE, people began to cultivate wild grasses that would become wheat and barley. They gathered the seeds of wild legumes that would become lentils and chickpeas. They watched wild sheep and goats, learning their patterns, slowly bringing them into the human sphere. This was not a sudden change. The process of domestication took thousands of years, each generation selecting seeds from the plants that produced the largest grains, that held their seeds more firmly, that ripened more uniformly. Each generation choosing to breed the animals that were most docile, most productive, most suited to life alongside humans. Over millennia, wild species were transformed into something new, something that could not survive without human care, something that would reshape the human world entirely. The decision to farm was not obviously beneficial. Archaeological evidence suggests that early farmers were often less healthy than their hunter-gatherer contemporaries. They were shorter in stature, their bones showed signs of nutritional deficiencies, their teeth were worse. Farming required vastly more labor than foraging. A hunter-gatherer might work 15 to 20 hours a week to secure food. An early farmer worked from dawn to dusk, breaking the soil with primitive tools, planting, weeding, guarding crops from birds and animals, harvesting, processing, storing. Yet farming offered something that hunting and gathering could not: predictability and surplus. A successful harvest meant food that could be stored through the winter, food that could support a larger population, food that freed some people from the constant work of food production to become artisans, priests, warriors, kings. Agriculture made civilization possible. It made cities possible. It made writing and art and philosophy possible. But it also made hierarchy possible, made warfare more devastating, made famine more catastrophic when crops failed. The early farmers could not have known all this. They simply worked the soil, season after season, learning through trial and error, through careful observation, through the accumulation of knowledge passed from parent to child. They developed techniques that modern scientists are only now beginning to fully understand and appreciate. They created sustainable systems that endured for thousands of years, feeding great civilizations without exhausting the land. As you settle deeper into rest, prepare yourself for a journey through these ancient fields. You will walk among the irrigation canals of Mesopotamia, feel the floodwaters of the Nile, climb the terraced mountains of China, and paddle through the floating gardens of Mesoamerica. You will learn the forgotten wisdom of farmers who fed the world without chemistry, without machinery, without anything but their hands, their tools, and their deep understanding of the earth. Let the modern world fade. Let yourself drift back through the centuries, through the millennia, to a time when every grain of wheat was a small miracle, when every successful harvest was a victory over chaos, when farming was not an industry, but a sacred covenant between humanity and the soil. The Fertile Crescent, cradle of cultivation. You find yourself standing in the broad alluvial plain. Between two great rivers, the sun hangs heavy in a cloudless sky, its heat pressing down like a physical weight. To the east flows the Tigris, its waters brown with silt. To the west, the Euphrates winds its way through the flat landscape. Between these rivers, in the land called Mesopotamia, meaning between rivers, the art of agriculture was being perfected. This is the Fertile Crescent, approximately 8,000 BCE. The landscape around you is not the desert that much of this region would later become. The climate is cooler, wetter, wild grasses grow in abundance. Stands of oak and pistachio trees dot the foothills to the north. Herds of gazelles move across the plains. This is a land rich with possibility. Walk with me through a small settlement. The houses are simple structures of packed mud and reeds, clustered together on a slight rise above the floodplain. Smoke rises from cooking fires. You hear the bleating of goats in a pen, the voices of children playing. But it is to the fields beyond the village that your attention is drawn. The fields stretch out in irregular patches, carved from the native grassland. The soil here is rich, deposited by countless spring floods, but the rainfall is unpredictable. Sometimes the rains come, sometimes they do not. The people here have learned to work with the rivers, digging channels to bring water to their crops when the sky offers none. This is the birth of irrigation, one of humanity's earliest and most important agricultural innovations. The primary crops grown here are wild emmer wheat and wild einkorn wheat, along with wild barley. These are the ancestors of modern wheat and barley, but they look quite different. The seed heads are smaller, the grains less uniform. Critically, these wild grasses have a brittle rachis, the part of the plant that holds the seeds. When the seeds ripen, the rachis shatters, scattering seeds across the ground. This is excellent for the plant's reproduction in the wild, but problematic for humans trying to harvest and store the grain. Watch as a woman moves through the field in the early morning, before the full heat of the day. She carries a sickle, its handle carved from wood, its blade made of sharp flint stones set into the wood with tree resin. She grasps a handful of stalks and cuts them with a smooth motion, laying them aside. She must harvest at just the right moment, after the grains have ripened, but before the rachis shatters and scatters the seeds she has worked so hard to cultivate. Over many generations, the farmers here are, perhaps without fully realizing it, selecting for a genetic mutation. Plants with a tougher rachis, one that does not shatter easily, are more likely to be harvested. More of their seeds are saved for planting next year. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the wheat is changing. It is becoming domesticated. It is becoming dependent on human hands for its reproduction, and humans are becoming dependent on it for their survival. After the harvest, the grain must be processed. The stalks are laid out on a flat threshing floor of packed earth or stone. Oxen or donkeys are driven in circles over the grain, their hooves separating the kernels from the chaff. Sometimes a threshing sledge is used. a flat board with stones embedded in the bottom, dragged over the grain by animals. The sound is rhythmic, hypnotic. The dust rises golden in the slanting afternoon light. Then comes winnowing. The threshed grain is tossed into the air with wooden shovels. The wind, which often picks up in the late afternoon, carries away the light chaff while the heavier grain falls back down. It requires skill, timing, and understanding of the wind. The women who do this work can tell by the feel of the breeze whether the moment is right. The cleaned grain is stored in large ceramic jars or in granaries built of mud brick, elevated off the ground to protect from moisture and rodents. This stored grain is wealth. It is security. It is the difference between survival and starvation when the next harvest fails. But the people here do not grow only grain. In the gardens near the houses, you see the ancestors of lentils, peas, chickpeas, and broad beans. These legumes are crucial. They provide protein, diversity in the diet, and, though the farmers do not understand the chemistry, they enrich the soil. Legumes have a unique relationship with certain bacteria in the soil. These bacteria form nodules on the roots and fix nitrogen from the air, converting it into a form that plants can use. A field planted with legumes becomes more fertile. The farmers observe this phenomenon without understanding its mechanism. They know only that when they rotate their crops, planting legumes after grains, the soil remains productive. As evening approaches, you see a man inspecting the irrigation channels. These are simple ditches, dug with wooden tools, leading from the river to the fields. During the growing season, when rain is scarce, he will open a gap in the riverbank, allowing water to flow into the channels and out across the fields. It requires constant maintenance. Silt must be cleared, breaches must be repaired, the flow must be managed so that some fields do not receive too much water, while others receive too little. This is the beginning of hydraulic civilization. Control of water is control of life itself in this landscape. In the centuries to come, as populations grow and settlements become cities, these simple irrigation systems will evolve into elaborate networks of canals, reservoirs, and distribution channels. Entire bureaucracies will arise to manage them. Kings will gain their power through their ability to organize the labor required to maintain these systems. But here now, it is still small-scale, communal, managed by the farmers themselves. The Sumerians, who will build the first cities in this region around 4000 BCE, will develop agricultural techniques that represent the culmination of thousands of years of experimentation. They will create the cedar plow, a remarkable innovation that combines plowing and seeding in a single operation. A funnel on top of the plow allows the farmer to drop seeds into a tube that delivers them directly into the furrow being cut by the plow blade. This ensures even spacing, proper depth, and far greater efficiency than broadcasting seeds by hand. They will develop an agricultural calendar, dividing the year into seasons for plowing, planting, irrigating, and harvesting. This calendar will be preserved in cuneiform texts, farmers' almanacs that contain detailed instructions. One such text, dating to approximately 1700 BCE, offers advice that is both practical and poetic. When you are about to cultivate your field, take care to open the irrigation works so that their water does not rise too high in it. When you have emptied it of water, watch the field's wet ground that it stays virgin ground. Let no wandering ox trample it. The Sumerian farmer is advised to plow the field twice, cross-plowing to break up clods and create a fine seed bed. He is instructed to keep his eye on the man who puts in the barley seed, ensuring that the seed reaches a depth of 2 fingers uniformly. He must pray to Ninkelim, the goddess of field rodents and vermin, asking her to keep the mice and locusts away. He must station guards to chase away the birds when the grain begins to ripen. These ancient instructions reveal sophisticated agricultural knowledge. The farmers of Mesopotamia understood soil preparation, seed rates, irrigation management, pest control, and the importance of timing. They knew that the date palm required artificial pollination, climbing the trees to dust the female flowers with pollen from male trees. They understood that some crops depleted the soil more than others. They practiced fallowing, allowing fields to rest and recover. Yet they also faced challenges that would eventually contribute to the decline of their civilization. The irrigation that made agriculture possible in this arid land carried a hidden danger. The water from the rivers contained dissolved salts. In a naturally rainy environment, these salts are washed down through the soil. But in an irrigated field, water evaporates from the surface, leaving the salts behind. Over centuries, the accumulation of salts in the soil reduced fertility. Crop yields declined. Some fields had to be abandoned. This process, called salinization, is recorded in ancient agricultural records. Early on, Sumerian farmers grew both wheat and barley. Gradually, wheat, which is more sensitive to salt, declined. By 2000 BCE, the agricultural texts mention only barley, but on this evening, 8,000 years before that crisis. As you stand in the cooling twilight, watching smoke rise from the village hearths, the soil is still fresh, the yields are good, and the future seems unlimited. The farmers here have created something remarkable. They have taken wild grasses and transformed them into reliable crops. They have built a relationship with the land that will feed civilizations for millennia. They have become, in a very real sense, partners with the earth in the great work of creation. As night falls and the stars emerge in the clear desert sky, you hear singing from the village. It is a harvest song, thanking the gods for their bounty, asking for their continued favor. The ancient Mesopotamians understood something that modern industrial agriculture has often forgotten. Farming is not just a technical process. It is a sacred act, a participation in the cycles of life and death, growth and decay that govern all existence. Let that song carry you forward through time and across space to another great river valley where farming reached even greater heights of sophistication and stability. Ancient Egypt, masters of the Nile. The air here is different, drier, clearer, carrying the scent of sun-baked mud and distant papyrus marshes. You stand on the bank of a river that seems impossibly wide, its water moving slowly, inexorably northward. This is the Nile, approximately 3000 BCE, during the Old Kingdom period when the Great Pyramids are being built. The civilization of ancient Egypt will endure for 3,000 years, longer than any other in human history. The secret of its longevity lies beneath your feet, in the dark, rich soil that stretches back from the river in a narrow, fertile strip. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus would later call Egypt the gift of the Nile, and he was absolutely correct. Every year, with a reliability that must have seemed miraculous to ancient people, the Nile floods. The timing is so consistent that the Egyptian calendar is built around it. The year is divided into 3 seasons: Akhet, the inundation, when the river floods; Pere, the growing season, when the waters recede and crops are planted; and Shemu, the harvest season, when the grain is cut and stored before the next flood arrives. You are here during Akhet in late summer. For the past several weeks, the river has been rising. You can see the watermarks on the trees and buildings, showing how high it has come. Soon it will crest and begin its slow retreat, leaving behind something more precious than gold: silt. This silt, washed down from the highlands of Ethiopia, where the Blue Nile originates, is extraordinarily fertile. It is rich in minerals and organic matter. When the floodwaters recede, they leave behind a fresh layer of this black soil, and it is into this replenished earth that the Egyptian farmers will plant their crops. This annual renewal means that Egyptian agriculture can continue year after year, century after century, without exhausting the soil. The farmers here do not need to practice crop rotation or let fields lie fallow. The Nile does the work for them, but the Egyptians are not passive recipients of the river's bounty. They have developed an elaborate system of basin irrigation to maximize the benefit of the flood. Walk with me along one of the raised embankments that divide the floodplain into a checkerboard of basins. Each basin is surrounded by earthen walls, creating a shallow depression several hundred meters on each side. When the flood comes, channels are opened, allowing water to flow from the river into the basins. The water sits in the basins for several weeks, depositing its load of silt. Then, before the water becomes stagnant, it is drained off into another basin at a lower elevation, and eventually back to the river. The process is carefully managed to ensure that each basin receives water at the right time and for the right duration. This system requires extraordinary organization and cooperation. A single farmer cannot build or maintain these basins alone. The work requires the coordinated effort of many villages. It requires someone to organize the labor, to decide when channels should be opened or closed, to mediate disputes when one basin's needs conflict with another's. This is one of the ways that Egyptian civilization develops its hierarchical structure, with local officials managing irrigation districts, regional governors overseeing multiple districts, and ultimately the pharaoh, the god-king, responsible for the fertility of the entire land. The height of the flood is critically important. If the flood is too low, not enough land is irrigated, and famine threatens. If it is too high, villages can be destroyed, embankments breached, the destruction offsetting the benefit. The Egyptians develop elaborate systems for measuring the flood. You can see one now, a Nilometer, a stone structure with a vertical shaft descending into the river. Marks are carved into the stone, measuring cubits and palms, allowing officials to precisely record the water level each day during the inundation. These measurements are not just practical, they are political and religious. A good flood means the gods are pleased, the pharaoh is fulfilling his cosmic role, and the people will eat. A bad flood means something is wrong in the relationship between earth and heaven, and action must be taken. The measurements are reported up the administrative hierarchy, eventually reaching the capital, where scribes record them on papyrus. We have Nilometer records spanning centuries, an invaluable record of climate and hydrology. Once the flood recedes and the planting season begins, you see farmers moving across the wet fields. The primary crop is emmer wheat, which makes excellent bread, and barley, which is used for bread and beer. Beer is not a luxury in ancient Egypt. It is a staple food, drunk by everyone from the pharaoh to the humblest laborer. It is nutritious, safer than water, and provides calories and vitamins. Workers building the pyramids receive their payment partly in beer and bread. The method of planting is simple but effective. After the flood waters recede, leaving the ground soft and wet, the farmer broadcasts seeds by hand, walking across the field and casting handfuls of grain in wide arcs. Then, remarkably, he drives herds of sheep or pigs across the field. The animals' hooves press the seeds into the soft mud, covering them to just the right depth. No plowing is necessary. The annual flood has already prepared the perfect seedbed. In fields farther from the river, where the floodwaters do not reach, the farmers must work harder. They use a simple plow called an aard, pulled by oxen. This tool does not turn the soil over like a modern plow. It merely scratches a furrow into the earth. But it is enough. The plowman guides the oxen in straight lines, while a second worker follows, dropping seeds into the furrows and covering them with his foot. Throughout the growing season, the crops require little care. The moisture from the flood, still held in the soil, is usually sufficient. The winter rains, though light, provide supplementation. But if the season is particularly dry, shaduf irrigation may be necessary. The shaduf is an ingeniously simple device, a long pole balanced on a fulcrum with a bucket on one end and a counterweight on the other. A farmer stands by the river, swings the bucket down to scoop water, then allows the counterweight to lift it. He swings the full bucket over to a channel leading to the field and tips it, releasing the water. It is labor-intensive, but it works. You can see men working the shadufs in rhythmic coordination, their movements almost meditative in their repetition. As the growing season progresses into Shemu, the harvest season, the fields turn golden. This is March or April by the modern calendar. The heat is building. Everyone in the village who is able works in the fields. Harvest time is a race against time. The grain must be cut, threshed, and stored before the next flood arrives. The harvesters move through the fields with sickles made of wood with flint teeth set along the edge. They cut the stalks fairly high, leaving the stubble in the field. The cut grain is bundled and carried on shoulder poles to the threshing floor, a circular area of packed earth. Here, oxen or donkeys are driven in circles over the grain. Sometimes a threshing sledge is used, similar to those in Mesopotamia. The work continues long into the night by the light of torches. The winnowing follows. In the late afternoon, when the prevailing north wind picks up, workers toss the threshed grain into the air with wooden scoops. The chaff blows away while the grain falls back to the floor. It is swept into piles, measured, and poured into large ceramic storage vessels or into granaries built of mud brick. This grain is the wealth of Egypt. Much of it is claimed as tax by the state, recorded meticulously by scribes who oversee the harvest with the authority of the pharaoh. These scribes carry measuring rods and write on papyrus or pottery shards, noting each farmer's yield. The grain flows into state granaries, massive structures that can be seen in tomb paintings. Long buildings with vaulted roofs, sometimes built in rows, capable of storing thousands of tons of grain. This stored grain serves multiple purposes. It feeds the bureaucracy, the priesthood, the army. It feeds the workers on royal building projects. Most importantly, it provides insurance against bad years. When the Nile flood is insufficient, grain from the royal granaries is distributed to prevent famine. This is the foundation of the pharaoh's power. He controls the surplus, and therefore controls life and death. But the Egyptians grow more than grain. In the gardens and irrigated plots near the villages, you see vegetables: onions, garlic, leeks, lettuce, cucumbers. These provide vitamins and variety to the diet. Flax is grown in special fields, harvested when the stems are green, processed through soaking and beating to extract the fibers, then spun and woven into linen. In an age before cotton, linen is the primary textile for clothing, from the rough tunics of workers to the fine, nearly transparent cloth worn by the nobility. Along the riverbanks, in the shallow marshes, papyrus grows in dense stands. This remarkable plant provides raw material for rope, baskets, sandals, small boats, and most famously, writing material. The stalks are harvested, the outer rind stripped away, the inner pith cut into thin strips. These strips are laid out in perpendicular layers, pounded to release their natural adhesive, pressed and dried to create sheets of papyrus. On this plant-based paper, the scribes of Egypt record the knowledge and administration of their civilization. In the narrow strip of cultivated land, date palms provide shade, fruit, and wood. The dates are a valuable source of sugar. The palm fronds are woven into baskets and roof thatch. Even the fiber at the base of the fronds is used for rope. Nothing is wasted. The Egyptian farmer's year is governed by the Nile's rhythm. He plants in certainty after the flood recedes. He watches the crops grow with minimal intervention required. He harvests in the reliable sunshine of late spring. Then, during the flood season, when the fields are underwater, he may be conscripted to work on state projects, digging canals, building temples, quarrying stone for monuments. This is how the pyramids were built, not by slaves as often imagined, but by farmers during the season, when they could not farm. The agricultural wisdom of ancient Egypt lies not in complex techniques, but in perfect adaptation to the environment. The Egyptians did not fight against their landscape, they worked with it. They accepted the rhythm of the flood and built their entire civilization around it. For 3,000 years, this system sustained one of the most stable, prosperous societies in human history. As twilight settles over the Nile Valley, you hear the lowing of cattle being driven back to their byres, the laughter of children playing in the dusty streets, the call to evening prayers at the local temple. The farmers here move through their routines with confidence born of countless generations of accumulated knowledge. They know this land, they know its moods and its gifts. They are, in the truest sense, masters of the Nile. Let the scene fade now. Let the sound of the great river recede, and prepare to journey eastward, to a civilization whose agricultural achievements have only recently been appreciated, whose cities rivaled those of Egypt and Mesopotamia, but whose script remains undeciphered and whose story is still being discovered. The Indus Valley, sophisticated water management. You find yourself in a landscape that is both foreign and strangely familiar. To the north, distant mountains rise in a hazy blue line. Before you stretches a broad plain, bisected by a wide, sluggish river. This is the Indus River, and the year is approximately 2500 BCA. You stand on the outskirts of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the great cities of the Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization, after another of its major cities. This civilization, contemporary with ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, would remain largely unknown to modern scholars until the 1920s, when excavations began to reveal its remarkable extent and sophistication. The Harappan culture covered a vast area, larger than either Egypt or Mesopotamia, stretching from the Himalayan foothills to the Arabian Sea, encompassing much of modern Pakistan and northwestern India. What immediately strikes you about Mohenjo-Daro is its planning. Unlike the organic, winding streets of many ancient cities, this place is laid out in a precise grid. The main streets run north-south and east-west, intersecting at right angles. They are straight, wide enough for cart traffic, and remarkably they include covered drains running along their sides. Secondary streets and alleys connect the main thoroughfares, but they too follow the grid pattern. The houses are built of standardized baked bricks. The uniformity is striking. Every brick is the same size, in a ratio of 4.21, a standard that holds across the entire civilization, from cities hundreds of miles apart. This speaks to a level of centralized planning and quality control that is quite extraordinary for the 3rd millennium BCE. But it is the water management systems that truly reveal the genius of Harappan engineering. Let us walk through the city and observe. Nearly every house, even modest ones, has a bathroom with a drainage system. Wastewater flows from the house into covered drains in the streets. These drains are built with careful gradients to ensure proper flow, with manholes at regular intervals for cleaning and maintenance. The drains eventually carry waste out of the city to soak pits or cesspools. This level of urban sanitation would not be seen again in human civilization until the Roman Empire, and in some parts of the world, not until the modern era. The Harappans clearly understood the importance of clean water and proper waste disposal for public health. In the center of the city stands a remarkable structure, the Great Bath. It is a large, watertight pool, approximately 12 meters long and 7 meters wide, sunk into the ground. The floor and walls are made of fired brick, with a layer of bitumen as waterproofing. Steps lead down into the bath from either end. Surrounding the pool are small rooms, perhaps changing rooms or individual bathing chambers. Fresh water is supplied by a well in an adjacent room, and there is a sophisticated drainage system to empty and refill the bath. The purpose of the Great Bath is uncertain. No written records exist to tell us. Most scholars believe it served a ritual or religious function, perhaps for ceremonial purification, but its very existence demonstrates the Harappan mastery of hydraulic engineering. Now, let us move beyond the city walls to the agricultural lands that sustain this urban population. The Indus Valley civilization arose in a challenging environment. The region receives monsoon rains, but they are seasonal and somewhat unpredictable. The Indus River floods annually, like the Nile, but the flooding is more violent and less predictable. The river can change course, devastating settlements in its path. The Harappans developed agricultural strategies that worked with these challenges. In the areas near the river, they built embankments and levees to protect fields and settlements from flooding. They dug canals to distribute water from the river to more distant fields. They built wells. Hundreds of wells have been found in Harappan sites, some lined with brick, demonstrating advanced understanding of groundwater management. The crops grown here are diverse. Wheat and barley are the staples, as in Mesopotamia and Egypt. But the Harappans also grow crops that originated in this region or were particularly well adapted to it. Archaeological excavations have found evidence of rice, which grows well in the wetter, more flood-prone areas. They cultivate various millets, drought-resistant grains that can survive in more marginal lands. They grow chickpeas, lentils, and other legumes. Dates, melons, and sesame are cultivated for food and oil. Most remarkably, the Harappans are the first people we know of to cultivate cotton. Wild cotton plants grew in the Indus Valley, and the Harappans domesticated them, selecting for larger bolls and longer fibers. They spun the cotton into thread and wove it into cloth. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing 2,000 years after the Harappan civilization had vanished, would mention with wonder the Indian plants that produce wool-bearing plants. As you walk through the agricultural lands surrounding Mohenjo-daro, you see evidence of careful field management. The fields are organized in regular plots, bounded by low embankments that help retain water. The soil here, annually enriched by silt from the Indus, floods is naturally fertile, but the farmers supplement it with organic matter, animal dung, household waste, plant debris from previous harvests. There is evidence, though somewhat disputed among scholars, that the Harappans practiced crop rotation. Fields excavated by archaeologists show layering that suggests alternating crops, possibly rotating between water-intensive crops like rice and more drought-tolerant ones like millet, or between grains and legumes. This would have been a sophisticated understanding of soil fertility management. The Harappans also understood irrigation at multiple scales. Large canals fed from the river watered extensive agricultural zones. Smaller channels distributed water to individual fields. At the smallest scale, workers carried water in vessels from wells to garden plots near the cities where vegetables and fruits were grown intensively. One of the most intriguing aspects of Harappan agriculture is the evidence for two planting seasons. The winter crops, wheat and barley, were planted after the monsoon and flood season in November or December and harvested in the spring. But the Harappans also grew summer crops, particularly rice and cotton, which were planted in the spring and harvested in the fall. This double cropping system maximized the productivity of the land and spread the labor and risk across the year. The tools used by Harappan farmers are similar to those used elsewhere in the ancient world. Wooden plows tipped with bronze or stone, pulled by oxen, sickles for harvesting, with blades of stone or bronze set into wooden handles, hoes and mattocks for breaking soil and weeding. But the standardization and quality of Harappan bronze tools is noteworthy. Bronze implements are found even in small village sites, suggesting they were not luxury items, but common agricultural equipment. The grain harvest was stored in large granaries, both at the household level and in massive communal granaries near the cities. The Great Granary at Mohenjo-daro is a huge structure built on a raised platform to protect the grain from moisture and flood damage. The floor is designed with air channels underneath to keep the grain dry and prevent spoilage. Similar granaries exist at Harappa and other cities. The scale of these structures indicates a society with significant agricultural surplus and sophisticated storage technology. What happened to this remarkable civilization remains one of archaeology's great mysteries. Around 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley cities began to decline. By 1300 BCE, they had been abandoned. The causes are debated, climate change leading to the drying of the Sarasvati River, which may have shifted agricultural patterns, changes in the course of the Indus River itself, the arrival of new populations from the northwest, or perhaps a combination of factors. The script of the Harappans has never been deciphered, so we have no written records to tell us what happened. But what we can see in the ruins of their cities and fields is a civilization that had achieved remarkable things. They built cities with urban planning and sanitation that would not be matched for millennia. They managed water with extraordinary skill, essential in a land where water is both life and destruction. They cultivated a diverse range of crops and developed agricultural techniques that sustained a large population for 1,000 years. As evening falls and you stand watching farmers in the fields working by the fading light, you sense the impermanence of all human achievement. These farmers, working soil that has fed people for centuries, have no idea that in a few hundred years their descendants will abandon these cities, that the reasons for their civilization's greatness and its decline will be lost to history, that 3,000 years will pass before archaeologists piece together fragments of their story. Yet the wisdom they have accumulated about water management, about working with rather than against the natural flood cycles, about urban sanitation, about agricultural diversity, this wisdom is real and valuable. As the stars emerge in the darkening sky, let this scene fade and prepare to journey even further east, to a land where farming would be elevated to an art form, where terraced mountains would bloom with rice, and where agriculture would be inseparable from philosophy and cosmology. Ancient China, rice terraces, and harmony with nature. The air here is humid, thick with moisture. You stand on a hillside in what is now southern China, in the valley of the Yangtze River, approximately 5,000 BCE. The landscape before you is unlike anything you have encountered so far in your journey. Mist hangs in the valleys below, and the hillsides around you are carved into a series of ascending steps, each one a small field, holding water that reflects the morning sky like a mirror. This is the birthplace of rice cultivation, one of the most important agricultural developments in human history. Rice will eventually feed more people than any other crop, becoming the staple food for more than half of humanity. And it all begins here, in these misty valleys where wild rice once grew in marshy areas and along river edges. The domestication of rice is a story of patience and observation, spanning thousands of years. Wild rice is an aquatic grass that grows in shallow water. Its grains are small, and like the wild wheat of the Fertile Crescent, they shatter easily when ripe, making harvesting difficult. But generation after generation of farmers here have selected seeds from plants with desirable traits: larger grains, tougher rachis, more uniform ripening. Slowly, imperceptibly, wild rice has become cultivated rice, a plant that depends on human intervention for its survival. What makes rice unique among the major grain crops is its relationship with water. Rice can grow in dry fields, but it thrives in flooded paddies. The standing water provides several benefits that the ancient Chinese farmers learned through long experience. It suppresses weeds, which cannot compete with rice in waterlogged conditions. It moderates temperature, protecting young plants from late frosts and mature plants from heat stress. It provides habitat for fish and other aquatic creatures that fertilize the soil with their waste and control insect pests. Most remarkably, the flooded conditions create an anaerobic environment in the soil that actually increases nutrient availability. Walk with me down the hillside, along the narrow earthen walls that separate one terrace from another. These terraces are marvels of engineering and labor. Each one must be perfectly level, or the water will pool at one end and drain from the other. The walls must be strong enough to hold back tons of water and soil, yet they are built simply of compacted earth, reinforced with stones and planted with grass whose roots help bind the soil. Creating these terraces requires an enormous investment of labor. Families and communities work together, sometimes over generations, to carve these steps into the mountainside. But once established, a terrace can be farmed indefinitely. Some rice terraces in China have been in continuous cultivation for over 1,000 years, passed down from parents to children through countless generations. The rice growing cycle here follows the rhythm of the monsoon. As spring arrives and temperatures warm, the terraces are prepared. If they have been left dry during the winter, they must be plowed. A farmer guides a water buffalo through the terrace, the animal's heavy hooves and the wooden plow breaking up the soil. Then water is let in from the channels that bring water down from higher elevations, fed by mountain streams and springs. Once the terrace is flooded and the soil has been worked into mud, the planting can begin. The method used here is transplanting, a technique that requires more labor than direct seeding but produces better yields. The farmer has prepared a small seedbed nursery where rice seeds were planted densely several weeks ago. The seedlings have grown to about 6 inches tall. Now they must be moved to the main paddies. You see groups of farmers, mostly women and children, standing in the flooded paddies. They work bent at the waist, taking small bundles of seedlings from baskets and pushing each one into the mud, spacing them carefully in rows. The work is backbreaking, hour after hour in the hot sun, standing in water and mud. Yet there is a rhythm to it, a meditative quality. Often the workers sing as they plant, traditional songs passed down through generations, the rhythm helping to coordinate their movements. Once planted, the rice requires constant attention. The water level in the paddies must be managed carefully. Too shallow, and weeds will grow. Too deep, and the young plants may be damaged. The farmer walks the terrace walls each day, checking the water, opening channels to let more water in from above or drain excess water to the terrace below. This requires intimate knowledge of the water system, understanding how changes in one terrace affect all the others below it. As the rice grows, the paddies transform. What was bare mud and water becomes a sea of green, the rice plants growing tall and lush. Dragonflies dart over the water, frogs chorus in the evening, fish swim among the rice stalks, placed there deliberately by the farmers. These fish eat insect larvae and produce fertilizer. And when the rice is harvested, they provide additional food. The Chinese understanding of agriculture is deeply influenced by philosophical and cosmological ideas. The concept of yin and yang, the complementary forces that must be balanced in all things, applies to farming. The dry uplands are yang, the wet paddies are yin. Grain crops are yang, vegetables are yin. Male labor, plowing, building, is yang. Female labor, planting, harvesting, is yin. A successful farm maintains balance between these forces. The agricultural calendar is coordinated with astronomy. Chinese farmers observe the stars and planets, noting their positions relative to the seasons. The appearance of certain constellations signals planting times. The winter solstice marks the turning of the year, when yang begins to strengthen. The spring equinox is the time for planting. The summer solstice marks the peak of yang, when growth is at its maximum. The autumn equinox is harvest time. These observations are recorded and systematized, eventually forming the basis of the Chinese lunisolar calendar that will be used for thousands of years. While rice dominates in the wet southern regions, in the drier north, along the Yellow River, different crops prevail. Here, farmers grow foxtail millet and broomcorn millet, ancient grains that are drought-tolerant and well-suited to the cooler, drier climate. These millets are not as familiar to modern people as rice or wheat, but they were the foundation of early Chinese civilization in the north, feeding the people who would eventually form the Shang and Zhou dynasties. The northern farmers practiced dry land agriculture. Without the natural fertility renewal that comes from river flooding or the nutrient cycling of rice paddies, they must work harder to maintain soil fertility. They develop sophisticated techniques of soil management. Fields are left fallow in rotation. Green manure crops, plants that are grown not for harvest, but to be plowed back into the soil, enrich the earth. Animal manure is carefully collected and spread on fields. Human waste, too, is used as fertilizer, collected from latrines and composted before application. This might seem unpleasant to modern sensibilities, but it represents an understanding of nutrient cycling that is scientifically sound. The Chinese also pioneered the intensive cultivation of vegetables and fruits in garden plots near homes. These gardens are densely planted with a remarkable diversity of crops: cabbages, radishes, turnips, onions, garlic, cucumbers, eggplants, soybeans, and many varieties of leafy greens. Fruit trees, peaches, plums, apricots, pears provide food and shade. Bamboo, which grows rapidly and has countless uses, is planted in groves. One crop that will become uniquely associated with China is tea. The tea plant is native to the mountainous regions of southwestern China, and the practice of brewing its leaves into a beverage begins in the mists of prehistory. By the time of the Han Dynasty, around 200 BCE, tea is cultivated in plantations, pruned into bushes that can be easily harvested. The young leaves are picked, processed in various ways, dried, roasted, fermented, to produce different types of tea. Tea becomes not just a beverage, but a cultural institution, a ritual, a meditation. Another uniquely Chinese agricultural achievement is sericulture, the cultivation of silkworms. The silkworm is the caterpillar of the moth Bombyx mori, which has been fully domesticated and cannot survive in the wild. The silkworms feed exclusively on mulberry leaves, so silk production requires the cultivation of mulberry groves. The process is labor-intensive and requires great skill. The silkworms must be kept at precise temperatures and fed constantly. When they spin their cocoons, the cocoons must be harvested at just the right moment before the moth emerges and breaks the silk thread. The cocoons are steamed or boiled to kill the pupae, then carefully unwound to extract the silk filament. A single cocoon can produce over 1 kilometer of silk thread, but it takes thousands of cocoons to produce enough silk for even a single garment. For centuries, the Chinese keep the secret of silk production, creating a monopoly on one of the ancient world's most valuable luxury goods. Silk becomes a form of currency, a diplomatic gift, and the commodity that gives its name to the Silk Road, the great trade route connecting China to the Mediterranean world. As you stand on the hillside terraces in the late afternoon, watching farmers prepare for the harvest, you witness a scene that embodies the Chinese agricultural ideal, harmony between human effort and natural patterns. The terraces follow the contours of the land rather than fighting against them. The water flows naturally from high to low, guided but not forced. The rice grows in its season, nurtured but not dominated. Early Chinese agricultural texts, such as the works attributed to the semi-mythical figures of the past, emphasize this principle of working with nature. The Tao Te Ching, written by Laozi around the 6th century BCE, contains agricultural metaphors throughout. The best farmer leaves no traces. This means the skilled farmer works so harmoniously with nature that his intervention is almost invisible, as if the crops had grown wild. As twilight approaches and lanterns are lit in the farmhouses dotting the hillsides, you hear the evening sounds. The lowing of water buffalo being led home, the splash of fish in the paddies, the distant sound of a flute. The Chinese farmer goes to rest, knowing that he has done his day's work, maintaining the delicate balance between earth and water, work and rest, human intention and natural flow. Let this scene fade now, this landscape of terraced mountains and reflecting paddies. Let the sound of water flowing through ancient channels carry you across the Pacific to another land of mountains and water, where farming would develop in complete isolation from the old world, where people would invent agriculture anew, creating techniques and crops that would transform the world. Mesoamerica, the Three Sisters, and Chinampas. You stand now in a landscape of dramatic contrasts. Behind you rise volcanic mountains, their peaks sometimes lost in clouds. Before you stretches a vast lake, its surface calm in the early morning light. This is the Valley of Mexico, approximately 1400 CE, during the height of the Aztec Empire. But the agricultural practices you are about to witness have roots going back thousands of years, to the very beginning of farming in the Americas. The story of agriculture in the New World is fundamentally different from that of the Old World. When the first humans crossed from Asia into the Americas, perhaps 15,000 years ago or more, they entered a continent with very different plants and animals. There were no wild wheat or barley here, no wild cattle or sheep suitable for domestication. The indigenous peoples of the Americas would have to domesticate entirely different species, inventing agriculture independently from their counterparts in Eurasia and Africa. The most important crop developed in the Americas is maize, known in much of the English-speaking world as corn. Maize is so heavily modified from its wild ancestor that for many years, scientists could not identify what that ancestor was. The breakthrough came in the mid-20th century when researchers demonstrated that maize was domesticated from a wild grass called teosinte, which looks almost nothing like modern corn. Teosinte has tiny ears with only a few kernels, each encased in a hard shell. It seems almost impossible that ancient farmers could have seen the potential in this unpromising plant, but they did. The domestication of maize, which occurred in southern Mexico around 7000 BCE, represents one of the most dramatic transformations of a wild plant in all of agricultural history. Through patient selection over thousands of years, the people of Mesoamerica transformed teosinte into a plant with large ears bearing hundreds of kernels, with soft, edible seeds in a variety of colors. By 3000 BCE, maize had become the staple crop throughout Mesoamerica. By the time Europeans arrived in the Americas, there were hundreds of varieties adapted to different climates and elevations, from sea level to high mountain valleys. But maize is rarely grown alone. Look at the field before you, and you will see what Mesoamerican farmers call the three sisters: maize, beans, and squash, grown together in a symbiotic relationship that represents sophisticated ecological understanding. The technique works like this. First, small mounds of earth are built, each about a meter in diameter and perhaps half a meter high. Into each mound, several maize seeds are planted. When the maize plants are about 6 inches tall, bean seeds are planted around the base of each stalk. Slightly later, squash seeds are planted around the perimeter of the mound. As the plants grow, each plays a specific role. The maize stalks grow tall and strong, providing a natural trellis for the bean vines to climb. The beans, like all legumes, host nitrogen-fixing bacteria in their roots, enriching the soil. The squash spreads out along the ground, its large leaves shading the soil, retaining moisture and suppressing weeds. The slightly prickly squash vines also deter pests such as raccoons that might otherwise feast on the ripening maize. The nutritional complementarity is equally elegant. Maize is rich in carbohydrates but deficient in certain amino acids, particularly lysine and tryptophan. Beans provide these missing amino acids. Together, they form a complete protein. Squash adds vitamins, minerals, and dietary fiber. This combination, consumed together, provides excellent nutrition. Many Mesoamerican peoples have maintained health on a diet based primarily on these three plants, supplemented with small amounts of other foods. The agricultural techniques vary across Mesoamerica's diverse environments. In the highland valleys, where rainfall is seasonal, farmers depend on timing their planting to coincide with the summer rainy season. They build terraces on hillsides, similar to those in China, but adapted to the local terrain and crops. Stone walls retain soil and create level planting surfaces. Irrigation canals bring water from mountain streams to supplement rainfall. In the lowland tropical forests, such as those of the Maya region, farmers practice a form of agriculture called slash and burn, or swidden cultivation. A section of forest is selected, usually a secondary growth area that is recovered from previous cultivation. During the dry season, the trees and undergrowth are cut down. The felled vegetation is left to dry for several weeks, then burned. The ash from the fire provides nutrients to the soil. Into this cleared area, crops are planted, primarily maize, beans, and squash, but also chili peppers, tomatoes, and numerous other plants. The field is productive for 2 to 3 years. Then, as soil fertility declines and weeds become more problematic, the field is abandoned and allowed to regenerate. The farmer moves to a new area and repeats the process. If the fallow period is long enough, 15 to 20 years, the system is sustainable. The forest regrows, nutrients accumulate, and the land can be farmed again. This system requires extensive land area and works only with relatively low population density. When populations grow too large, the fallow periods become shorter. The forest does not fully recover, and soil fertility declines. But here in the Valley of Mexico, where you now stand, a different and more intensive system has been perfected. The chinampas, often called floating gardens, though they do not actually float. Walk with me to the edge of the lake. The shoreline is not a simple boundary between land and water. Instead, you see a complex network of canals and rectangular plots. These are the chinampas, artificial agricultural islands created in the shallow lake waters. The construction of a chinampa is an engineering feat. First, the lake bottom in shallow areas is marked out into rectangles, typically about 30 meters long and 2.5 meters wide. Reeds and stakes are driven into the mud to mark the boundaries. Then, mud and decaying vegetation are scooped from the lake bottom and piled onto the marked area, building it up above the water level. The edges are reinforced with woven reeds and eventually with willow trees planted along the borders. The willow roots grow down into the lake bed, anchoring the chinampa in place and preventing erosion. Once established, a chinampa is extraordinarily productive. The farmer has constant access to water for irrigation. He simply dips a bucket into the canal beside his plot. The mud scooped from the canals is rich in organic matter and nutrients. It is regularly added to the surface of the chinampa, refreshing the soil. The water surrounding the chinampa moderates temperature, protecting crops from frost and extreme heat. Multiple crops can be grown each year on a chinampa. The growing season in this highland valley is limited by frost, but by using small covered seed beds and transplanting seedlings to the main growing areas, farmers extend the productive season. The chinampas produce not just maize, beans, and squash, but also tomatoes, chili peppers, amaranth, herbs, and flowers. The productivity per unit area is among the highest of any pre-industrial agricultural system in the world. The chinampas of the Valley of Mexico, particularly those around the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, support a population estimated at 200,000 to 400,000 people in the city itself, with perhaps 1 million more in the surrounding valley. This is one of the largest cities in the world in the 15th century, and it is fed primarily by chinampa agriculture. You see farmers moving along the canals in flat-bottomed canoes, transporting produce to market, bringing organic waste from the city back to enrich the chinampa soil. The canals serve as transportation networks, connecting the agricultural zones to the urban center. It is a remarkably efficient system, minimizing the labor required to move heavy loads. In the mountains above the valley, where the climate is cooler and the terrain too steep for chinampas, farmers practice terrace agriculture. The terraces here are built with stone walls, some standing several meters high. The labor required to build these terraces is immense, often mobilized through collective work obligations. But once built, they create arable land where only steep, erosion-prone slopes existed before. The Aztecs and other Mesoamerican peoples also domesticated other important crops. Amaranth, a plant with edible seeds and leaves, is high in protein and minerals. It is so important in Aztec culture that it is used in religious ceremonies, shaped into figures representing gods. Chia seeds, from a plant in the mint family, are rich in omega-3 fatty acids and serve as a staple food for warriors and long-distance runners. Cacao from the lowland tropical forests is processed into a bitter beverage that is consumed in elite contexts and used as a form of currency. The agricultural calendar in Mesoamerica is intimately connected with astronomy and religion. The Maya, whose civilization flourished in the tropical lowlands from approximately 250 to 900 CE, developed sophisticated calendars based on careful astronomical observation. They track the movements of Venus, which they associate with agricultural cycles and warfare. They calculate the solar year with remarkable precision. Their long count calendar measures time from a mythological starting point in 3114 BCE and can calculate dates thousands of years into the future. For the Maya farmer, time is not simply a sequence of days, but a complex interlocking of cycles. The 260-day sacred calendar, the 365-day solar calendar, and longer cycles all interact. Certain days are auspicious for planting, others for harvesting. Religious ceremonies must be performed at specific times to ensure agricultural success. The farmer consults with priests and calendar keepers to determine the proper timing for agricultural activities. The Inca Empire, which dominates the Andes Mountains of South America from the 13th to 16th centuries, develops its own remarkable agricultural systems adapted to the extreme altitude and terrain of their homeland. In the Andes, potatoes are the staple crop. Domesticated from wild species native to the region, potatoes are extraordinarily diverse. The Inca cultivate hundreds of varieties, each adapted to specific altitude ranges and climate conditions. At the highest elevations, above 4,000 meters where even potatoes struggle, the Inca process potatoes into chuño, freeze-dried potatoes that can be stored for years. The process is simple but ingenious. Potatoes are left outside during the freezing nights of the dry season. During the day, people trample on the frozen potatoes, squeezing out moisture. After several cycles of freezing and trampling, the potatoes are completely dehydrated and can be stored indefinitely. Chuño is lightweight, nutritious, and perfect for feeding armies on campaign or as emergency food during famines. The Inca build agricultural terraces on a scale that dwarfs even the chinampas of the Aztecs. Entire mountainsides are carved into thousands of terraces, creating microclimates at different elevations. Lower terraces grow maize. Middle elevations produce potatoes and quinoa. Higher terraces cultivate hardy tubers like oque and uluco. This vertical agriculture allows the Inca to maximize food production in a landscape where flat arable land is scarce. Water management in the Andes is critical and complex. The Inca build extensive irrigation systems, including stone-lined channels that carry water from mountain streams and glacial melt down to the terraces. Some of these channels run for kilometers, following the contours of the mountains with precise gradients. The engineering is so sound that some Inca irrigation systems are still in use today, 500 years after the empire's fall. The Inca also developed sophisticated storage systems. At Colca, near Cusco, vast complexes of storage buildings hold reserves of maize, potatoes, quinoa, and other crops. These reserves serve multiple purposes: feeding the army and government officials, providing relief during crop failures, and redistributing food from areas of surplus to areas of scarcity. This system of state-controlled agriculture and storage allows the Inca to maintain control over a vast empire stretching from modern Colombia to central Chile. As evening falls over the Valley of Mexico, you stand on a chinampa watching the sun set behind the volcanic mountains. Farmers are securing their canoes, carrying the last loads of produce home. Smoke rises from cooking fires throughout the valley. The city of Tenochtitlan, built on an island in the lake and connected to the shore by great causeways, glows in the fading light. These farmers, working their chinampas and mountain terraces, have created agricultural systems that are marvels of adaptation and ingenuity. They have domesticated entirely different crops from those in the Old World and developed entirely different techniques. Yet they face the same fundamental challenge as farmers everywhere, coaxing food from the earth, season after season, year after year, generation after generation. The three sisters grow in fields across 2 continents. The chinampas produce their bounty from lake water and mud. The terraces march up the mountainsides, creating arable land where none existed before. These are the achievements of human ingenuity, persistence, and intimate knowledge of place. Let this scene fade now. Let the sounds of the evening market in Tenochtitlan recede. Prepare to journey to yet another land, to the shores of the Mediterranean, where agriculture would be integrated with philosophy, where farming would be both a practical pursuit and a subject for literary contemplation. Ancient Greece and Rome, Mediterranean agriculture. The light here is different, clear, sharp, the air dry and scented with herbs. You stand on a hillside in ancient Greece, perhaps in Attica, the region surrounding Athens around 400 BCE. The landscape is rocky, the soil thin. Olive trees, their trunks gnarled and ancient, dot the slopes. Below, in a small valley, you see fields of grain and the geometric pattern of a vineyard. Mediterranean agriculture is defined by its climate: hot, dry summers and mild, wet winters. The crops grown here are adapted to this pattern. They are the foundation of what historians call the Mediterranean triad: wheat, olives, and grapes. Wheat is the prestige grain of the classical world, preferred over barley because it makes better bread. But wheat is demanding. It requires better soil, more moisture, more careful cultivation than barley. On the thin soils of much of Greece, barley is actually the more common crop. It is more drought-tolerant, more reliable, though considered inferior in quality. The agricultural year in Greece begins with the autumn rains. The long, dry summer has left the soil hard and parched. When the rains soften the earth, usually in October or November, plowing begins. The Greek plow is simple, a wooden ard with an iron tip, pulled by a pair of oxen. The farmer guides it in straight lines across the field, scratching furrows into the earth. The soil is often so rocky that the plow strikes stones that must be laboriously removed and piled at the field's edge. After plowing, the grain is sown by broadcasting. The farmer walks across the plowed field, reaching into a bag of seed and casting handfuls in wide arcs. Then the field is plowed again, crosswise to the first plowing, covering the seeds. This double plowing is standard practice, creating a finer seedbed and ensuring good seed-to-soil contact. The grain grows through the wet winter months. Little care is required during this time. In early spring, as the weather warms and the grain heads form, the farmer may weed the field, pulling up wild plants that compete with the crop. This is labor-intensive work, but necessary for a good yield. Harvest comes in late spring or early summer, before the heat becomes too intense. The timing is critical. If the grain is harvested too early, the kernels are not fully developed. If too late, the brittle stalks shatter and the grain is lost. Entire families work in the fields during harvest, cutting the grain with sickles and binding it into sheaves. The Greek poet Hesiod, writing around 700 BCE in his work, Works and Days, provides detailed advice on farming. He describes the proper time for plowing. When the Pleiades, daughters of Atlas, are rising, begin your harvest, and your plowing when they are going to set. He advises on the proper tools. Get yourself a plow. It is better to get one ready-made rather than have to make one yourself. He warns about lazy workers. Do not put your work off till tomorrow and the day after, for a sluggish worker does not fill his barn. Hesiod's work is not just agricultural advice, it is moral philosophy. For Hesiod, farming is the proper occupation for a virtuous man. It teaches discipline, patience, and proper relationship with the gods. Zeus, the chief god, sends the seasons. Demeter, goddess of grain and harvest, must be honored with offerings and festivals. The farmer who works hard, respects the gods, and treats his neighbors justly will prosper. The lazy, impious man will fail. But Greece cannot feed itself from its grain fields alone. The population grows, the cities expand, and the thin soils and mountainous terrain cannot produce enough wheat and barley. Athens, at its height in the 5th century BCE, imports massive quantities of grain, primarily from the Black Sea region and from Sicily and Egypt. The vulnerability of these supply lines is a constant concern. Athens maintains a large navy, partly to protect the grain ships that sustain its population. What Greece does produce in abundance is olives and grapes, crops perfectly suited to the Mediterranean climate. Walk with me through the olive grove on this hillside. The trees are ancient, some perhaps a century old or more. Olive trees are remarkably long-lived. Some specimens in the Mediterranean are over 1,000 years old and still producing fruit. Olive cultivation requires patience. A young olive tree takes 10 to 15 years to begin significant production. But once mature, it produces for centuries with minimal care. The trees are drought-resistant, their deep roots finding water unavailable to annual crops. They thrive on rocky hillsides where grain cannot be grown. The olive harvest occurs in late autumn or early winter. The olives are beaten from the trees with long poles, falling onto cloths spread on the ground. They are gathered into baskets and carried to the pressing facility. Olive oil is extracted by crushing the olives in a mill, a large circular stone rolled over the fruit, and then pressing the resulting paste to squeeze out the oil. Olive oil is essential to Mediterranean life. It is food, providing calories and essential fatty acids. It is fuel, burned in lamps for light. It is used in religious rituals, for anointing athletes before games, as a base for perfumes and medicines. It is a valuable trade commodity, exported in large ceramic amphorae to distant markets. The vineyard, too, is perfectly adapted to Mediterranean conditions. Grapevines are hardy, tolerating poor soil and dry conditions. They grow well on terraced hillsides. The Greeks cultivate numerous varieties of grapes, each with different characteristics and uses. The grape harvest is a festival time. It occurs in late summer when the grapes are fully ripe and sweet. Workers move through the vineyard with knives, cutting bunches of grapes and laying them in baskets. The grapes are carried to a pressing floor where they are crushed. Traditionally, this is done by human feet. Workers trample the grapes in large vats, the juice flowing out through channels into collection vessels. Wine in the ancient Mediterranean. World is not the refined beverage of modern wine culture. It is drunk mixed with water, often in a ratio of 2 or 3 parts water to 1 part wine. Drinking unmixed wine is considered barbaric. Wine is consumed at virtually every meal, providing calories, vitamins, and, importantly, a safer alternative to water, which is often contaminated. The Greeks also practiced garden cultivation. Near farmhouses and in urban areas, small intensive gardens produce vegetables. Onions, garlic, leeks, cucumbers, lettuce, radishes, legumes, chickpeas, lentils, and fava beans are grown both in fields as rotation crops with grain and in gardens. These provide essential protein in a diet that includes relatively little meat. The Romans, who will conquer and absorb the Greek world, take Mediterranean agriculture to new levels of sophistication. Roman agricultural writers produce detailed treatises on farming. Cato the Elder writes De Agricultura around 160 BCA, offering practical advice on estate management. Marcus Terentius Varro writes Rerum Rusticarum in the 1st century BCE, discussing crops, livestock, and estate organization. Columella in the 1st century CE produces De Re Rustica, a comprehensive 12-volume work covering all aspects of agriculture. These works reveal an agricultural system that is highly commercialized and profit-oriented. The Roman elite owned large estates called latifundia, worked by enslaved people. These estates are run as businesses, producing crops for sale rather than subsistence. The owners live in Rome or other cities, managing their properties through overseers. The Romans perfect techniques of grafting, particularly with fruit trees. By joining the shoot of a desired variety to the rootstock of a hardy tree, they can propagate specific varieties reliably and quickly. This allows them to develop and maintain dozens of varieties of apples, pears, figs, and other fruits, each selected for particular qualities. Roman water management is extraordinarily sophisticated. Aqueducts carry water from distant sources to cities, sometimes across dozens of miles, maintaining precise gradients to ensure flow. The water is used for public fountains, baths, and also for irrigation. Roman engineers build dams, reservoirs, and complex distribution systems. The Romans also pioneer the use of water mills for grinding grain. Previous civilizations had used only human or animal power to turn millstones. The Romans harness water power, building mills along streams and rivers. These mills dramatically increase productivity, allowing a single mill to grind what would have required many workers or animals to produce. Crop rotation is practiced systematically in Roman agriculture. The standard rotation is a 2-year cycle, wheat or barley 1 year, followed by a legume crop or fallow the next year. More intensive rotations are practiced on highly fertile land or land close to cities where manure is readily available. Roman agricultural writers discuss in detail the value of different manures: horse, cow, sheep, pig, even human, and the proper methods of composting and application. The Romans also understand the value of green manure. Lupines, a type of legume, are sown specifically to be plowed back into the soil while still green, adding organic matter and nitrogen. This practice allows continuous cultivation without exhausting the soil. Yet Roman agriculture faces significant challenges. The reliance on enslaved labor, while profitable in the short term, creates inefficiencies. Enslaved workers have no incentive to work carefully or innovatively. Tools must be simple and sturdy because they will be used carelessly or sabotaged. The system requires constant supervision and enforcement. As the Roman Empire expands, it becomes dependent on grain imports from distant provinces, particularly Egypt and North Africa. Sicily, Sardinia, and later North Africa are the breadbaskets of Rome, producing massive surpluses for export. When these supply lines are disrupted by war or piracy, food shortages and even famines can occur in Rome itself. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE brings significant changes to European agriculture. The centralized system of large estates breaks down. Trade networks fragment, population declines. Agriculture becomes more localized and subsistence-oriented. Many Roman agricultural techniques are forgotten or abandoned. It will take centuries for European agriculture to regain the sophistication and productivity of the Roman era. As evening falls over the Greek hillside where you stand, you watch a farmer driving his oxen home from the fields. The setting sun illuminates the olive trees, their leaves silver green in the slanting light. In the valley below, the vineyard looks dark against the pale soil. A shepherd moves his flock toward shelter, the sound of bells carrying on the quiet air. The agricultural wisdom of Greece and Rome, the written treatises, the perfected techniques, the systematic approach, represents a culmination of millennia of farming knowledge. But much of this wisdom is specific to the Mediterranean environment. In other climates, on other soils, different approaches are needed. Let this Mediterranean evening fade. Prepare to gather up the scattered threads of wisdom from all the places you have visited, to see what universal principles emerge, and to discover what ancient techniques have been forgotten, but perhaps should be remembered. Forgotten techniques, wisdom lost to time. You stand now in a place between places, a time between times. Around you, images flicker like memories. The Mesopotamian farmer checking his irrigation channels, the Egyptian measuring the Nile flood, the Chinese terracing a mountainside, the Aztec paddling between chinampas. Each image represents accumulated wisdom, knowledge built up over countless generations through observation, experimentation, and intimate connection with place. But much of this wisdom has been lost. The industrialization of agriculture in the 19th and 20th centuries, while dramatically increasing yields and feeding a growing global population, has also severed many connections to traditional agricultural knowledge. Chemical fertilizers replaced the careful composting and manuring practices of earlier farmers. Mechanization made certain labor-intensive techniques economically unviable. Monoculture, growing a single crop over vast areas, replaced the diverse, integrated systems that characterized most traditional agriculture. Only recently have scientists and farmers begun to realize that some ancient practices embody sophisticated ecological understanding that modern agriculture has overlooked. Let us explore some of these forgotten techniques and the wisdom they contain. In the Amazon basin, one of the most remarkable agricultural legacies is terra preta, or dark earth. For much of the 20th century, scientists believed that the Amazon rainforest, despite its appearance of lush fertility, had poor soils unsuitable for permanent agriculture. The forest grows on ancient, heavily leached tropical soils that are acidic and low in nutrients. Slash and burn agriculture, the only method thought viable, quickly exhausts these soils. But scattered throughout the Amazon are patches of unusually dark, fertile soil, sometimes several hectares in extent and up to 2 meters deep. These soils, called terra preta do Indio, Indian black earth, are extraordinarily fertile. They contain much higher levels of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and other nutrients than surrounding soils. Crucially, they contain large amounts of charcoal. Research has revealed that terra preta is not natural. It was created by indigenous Amazonian peoples over centuries, perhaps millennia, before European contact. These farmers did not simply burn and clear the forest. They practiced a sophisticated form of soil enrichment, adding charcoal from low-temperature fires, along with pottery shards, animal bones, and organic waste. The charcoal, called biochar by modern scientists, is the key. It is stable, persisting in soil for centuries or even millennia. It increases the soil's capacity to hold water and nutrients. It provides habitat for beneficial soil microorganisms. The terra preta sites are often found near settlements, suggesting that they were created gradually through the addition of household waste, charcoal from cooking fires, and deliberate soil amendments. What appeared to European observers as primitive slash-and-burn agriculture was actually a system that was building soil fertility over time, creating agricultural land that could be cultivated continuously. This knowledge was lost when indigenous populations collapsed following European contact, devastated by disease, warfare, and enslavement. The agricultural systems they had developed disappeared with them. Now, scientists are working to understand and recreate terra preta, seeing in it a model for sustainable tropical agriculture and a means of sequestering carbon to mitigate climate change. Another example of forgotten hydraulic engineering comes from the Nabateans, who inhabited what is now southern Jordan and northern Saudi Arabia from approximately the 4th century BCE to the 1st century CE. They built their capital, Petra, in an arid desert region with less than 150 millimeters of annual rainfall. Yet they supported a population of thousands in this seemingly inhospitable environment. The Nabateans were masters of water harvesting. They built systems to capture every drop of rain that fell in their territory. On hillsides, they constructed small dams across ravines to slow water runoff, allowing it to infiltrate into the soil rather than rushing away. They carved channels into cliff faces to divert flash floods from wadis into cisterns and reservoirs. They built elaborate conduit systems to carry water from distant springs to the city. Some of these conduits were pressurized, running uphill using a siphon principle, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of hydraulics. For agriculture, they developed techniques for farming in conditions that seem impossible. They identified small areas where water naturally accumulated at the base of slopes, in slight depressions, and built stone terraces and walls to capture additional runoff. They planted drought-tolerant crops, dates, figs, olives, and grain varieties adapted to arid conditions. Every plant was positioned to make maximum use of available water. The Nabatean capital of Petra was eventually abandoned and their agricultural knowledge forgotten. The cisterns and channels fell into disrepair. When European travelers rediscovered Petra in the 19th century, it seemed inconceivable that a major city could have existed in such a barren landscape. Only careful archaeological investigation revealed the sophisticated water management systems that had made it possible. Today, as climate change brings increased drought to many agricultural regions, there is renewed interest in ancient water harvesting techniques. In India, traditional systems of small check dams and tanks, once dismissed as primitive, are being restored and providing crucial water security. In the Middle East, techniques similar to those of the Nabateans are being revived. Ancient farmers also understood plant breeding in ways that modern agriculture is only now rediscovering. Without any knowledge of genetics, they selected seeds from plants with desirable characteristics, saving the best for next year's planting. Over many generations, this selection created the domesticated crops that feed the world. But ancient farmers practiced selection within diverse populations. A traditional wheat field might contain dozens or even hundreds of slightly different varieties, each with unique characteristics. Some plants were more drought-resistant, some more disease-resistant, some yielded more, some had better flavor. This diversity meant that in any given year, some plants would thrive regardless of conditions. If disease struck, some varieties would survive. If the season was unusually dry or wet, some would produce. The field as a whole was resilient. Modern industrial agriculture, in contrast, plants genetically uniform varieties. Every plant in a wheat field of thousands of hectares is essentially identical. This uniformity allows for efficient mechanized planting and harvest, and in good conditions, maximum yields. But it also creates vulnerability. If a new disease appears, if climate conditions are unfavorable, the entire crop can fail. Plant breeders are now working to reintroduce diversity, creating population varieties that contain genetic variation while maintaining overall desirable characteristics. This approach mirrors what traditional farmers practiced, though with modern understanding of genetics. Companion planting, the practice of growing different plants together for mutual benefit, was widely practiced in traditional agriculture. We have already seen the three sisters of Mesoamerica: maize, beans, and squash grown together. Similar associations exist worldwide. In China, farmers traditionally grew rice and fish together in paddies. The fish controlled insect pests and added fertilizer through their waste. Their movement around the paddy helped aerate the water and soil. The farmers gained two crops, grain and protein, from the same field. In Europe, farmers planted nitrogen-fixing legumes as living mulch beneath fruit trees. The legumes improved soil fertility. Their flowers attracted pollinators for the trees, and they suppressed weed growth. Modern science has validated many of these practices. Plants do interact in complex ways. Some repel insects that attack others. Some attract beneficial insects. Some exude chemicals from their roots that help or hinder neighboring plants. Traditional farmers discovered these relationships empirically and incorporated them into their practices. Ancient farmers also paid attention to lunar cycles and seasonal timing in ways that modern agriculture often dismisses as superstition. Many traditional agricultural calendars specify not just the month or season for planting, but the phase of the moon. Typically, crops that bear fruit above ground are planted during the waxing moon when lunar gravitational pull on water is increasing. Root crops are planted during the waning moon. Modern research has found some scientific basis for these practices. Lunar cycles do affect water movement in soil, though the effect is subtle. More significantly, many aspects of plant physiology are governed by circadian rhythms and seasonal light patterns. Traditional farmers, through generations of careful observation, learned to work with these rhythms even without understanding their mechanism. Perhaps the most important forgotten wisdom is the understanding that agriculture is not just extraction, but partnership. Traditional farmers understood themselves as participants in natural cycles, not dominators of nature. They worked with the rhythms of season, soil, and water, rather than attempting to override them. This meant accepting limits. A field could produce only so much. Pushing beyond that limit might give a larger harvest one year, but depleted soil would give smaller harvests in future years. A forest could be cleared for farmland, but clearing too much led to erosion, water shortages, and long-term decline. Modern industrial agriculture, armed with fossil fuels, synthetic fertilizers, and pesticides, has often ignored these limits, at least temporarily. Yields have increased dramatically, but the costs, soil degradation, water pollution, loss of biodiversity, greenhouse gas emissions, are becoming increasingly apparent. As you stand in this place between times, the images around you begin to coalesce. You see patterns that repeat across cultures and continents, the careful observation of natural cycles, the patient selection and improvement of crops, the recycling of organic matter back to the soil, the integration of multiple crops and animals in mutually beneficial systems, the small-scale manipulation of water and landforms to create favorable growing conditions. These are not primitive practices to be dismissed. They represent sophisticated ecological knowledge, accumulated over thousands of years. They offer insights that remain valuable, perhaps more valuable now than ever. As humanity grapples with the challenge of feeding 10 billion people on a planet under environmental stress, let these images fade now. Let yourself drift toward the closing of this journey through the ancient fields of the world, the sacred and the practical. Throughout your journey, walking through the agricultural landscapes of ancient civilizations, you have noticed something that modern industrial agriculture often lacks: the presence of the sacred. Agriculture in traditional societies was never purely a technical or economic activity. It was woven together with religion, ritual, and cosmology. Every agricultural civilization had its deities of farming and fertility. In Mesopotamia, Nisaba was goddess of grain and writing. The connection significant as written records began largely to track agricultural production. Tammuz was the god of vegetation, dying each autumn when plants withered and reborn each spring with the new growth. In Egypt, Osiris was both god of the dead and god of agriculture, a connection that reflected the cycle of life emerging from death, seeds buried in earth sprouting into new life. Isis was goddess of fertility and magic. Renunutet was the divine cobra goddess who protected the harvest. The Greeks honored Demeter, goddess of grain and harvest. Her daughter Persephone's annual descent to the underworld and return explained the agricultural cycle. When Persephone was gone, Demeter mourned and the earth was barren. When she returned, Demeter rejoiced and growth returned. The Eleusinian Mysteries, one of the most important religious ceremonies in ancient Greece, centered on this agricultural myth. In China, the agricultural calendar was integrated with ancestor worship and cosmic harmony. Farmers made offerings to the spirits of their ancestors before beginning agricultural work, seeking blessing and protection. The emperor himself performed ceremonial plowing at the start of each agricultural year, a ritual affirming his role as intermediary between heaven and earth, responsible for the land's fertility. The Aztecs performed elaborate ceremonies throughout the agricultural cycle. At planting time, they made offerings to Tlaloc, god of rain, and Centeotl, god of maize. The 260-day sacred calendar was structured around agricultural timing. Human sacrifice, however disturbing to modern sensibilities, was understood within their cosmology as necessary to maintain the cosmic order that allowed crops to grow. Why this universal connection between agriculture and religion? Several reasons suggest themselves. First, farming is fundamentally dependent on forces beyond human control. A farmer can prepare the soil perfectly, plant at the right time, tend the crop diligently, yet still fail if the rains do not come, if locusts swarm, if blight strikes. Appealing to divine powers was a way of asserting some influence over the uncontrollable. Second, agriculture confronts farmers daily with the fundamental mysteries of existence, life emerging from death, the seasonal cycles of growth and decay, the dependency of human life on other living things. These experiences naturally provoke religious and philosophical reflection. Third, agricultural societies developed hierarchies and specializations. Some people produced food while others, priests, rulers, artisans, did not. The religious framework that made agriculture sacred also justified this social organization. Priests mediated between humans and the gods who controlled fertility. Rulers organized the collective labor required for irrigation and other large projects, claiming divine sanction for their authority. The festivals and ceremonies of agricultural societies served practical purposes beyond their religious meaning. Harvest festivals brought communities together, reinforcing social bonds. Religious calendars helped coordinate agricultural activities, ensuring that everyone in a community plowed, planted, and harvested at approximately the same time, necessary for managing irrigation systems and protecting crops from pests and predators. Agricultural wisdom was transmitted through multiple channels. The most important was simple practice, children working alongside parents in the fields, learning by doing and observation. A farmer learned to recognize when soil was properly prepared, when grain was ready for harvest, when to water, and when to withhold water, through repeated experience under the guidance of those with more experience. But agricultural knowledge was also embedded in stories, songs, proverbs, and rituals. A planting song might encode information about proper spacing or depth. A festival timing ensured work began at the optimal season. A proverb, plant corn when the oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear, communicated timing information in memorable form. In some societies, agricultural knowledge was written down. We have already mentioned the works of Hesiod, Cato, Varro, and Columella from the Greco-Roman world. The Chinese developed an extensive agricultural literature with works like the Qimin Yao Shu, Essential Techniques for the Peasantry, written in the 6th century CE, providing detailed instructions on cultivation, animal husbandry, and food processing. Yet most farmers were illiterate. Written agricultural texts were produced by and for the elite, landowners, administrators, scholars. The vast majority of agricultural knowledge remained oral, practical, embodied in the hands and backs and eyes of working farmers. This created a paradox. The farmers who actually worked the land possessed the most detailed and practical knowledge, but they had little power or prestige. The landowners and scholars who wrote about agriculture might have more theoretical knowledge, but less practical skill. This divide between those who think and those who do, between mental and manual labor, is one of the fundamental social divisions that agriculture created. The role of the farmer in early civilizations was complicated. On one hand, farmers were essential. All the wealth and power of civilization rested on the food surplus they produced. Without farmers, there could be no cities, no arts, no philosophy, no empire. On the other hand, farmers were often looked down upon by urban elites. Farming was hard, dirty work that left people bent and weathered. The philosopher or poet might romanticize the noble simplicity of rural life, but few chose to actually live it. Yet there persisted across many cultures an ideal of the farmer as the backbone of society, the source of virtue and stability. The Roman Republic valued the citizen farmer soldier who worked his own land and served in the army. Confucian philosophy in China held that farmers who produced essential goods were second in the social hierarchy only to scholars, above artisans and merchants. Jeffersonian democracy in America idealized the independent yeoman farmer as the foundation of republican virtue. These ideals rarely matched reality. In practice, most ancient agriculture was performed by people with little freedom or power. Enslaved people in Greece and Rome, serfs in medieval Europe, peasants bound to landlords throughout much of Asia. The independent small farmer might be celebrated in rhetoric, but was often economically marginal, vulnerable to debt, drought, and domination by larger landholders. Yet the connection between working the land and certain virtues, patience, diligence, attunement to natural rhythms, understanding of life and death, is not entirely romantic fantasy. Farming does cultivate these qualities, at least potentially. The farmer must be patient, waiting months for a crop to mature. The farmer must be diligent, as neglect brings failure. The farmer must pay attention to subtle signs, the feel of soil, the look of leaves, the smell of weather changing. The farmer witnesses birth and death constantly, understands that life feeds on life, that mortality and growth are intertwined. These lessons, learned in the field, represent a form of wisdom that modern urban civilization often lacks. As humanity has become increasingly divorced from agricultural labor, in developed nations, farmers now represent less than 2% of the population. We have lost touch with these fundamental realities. As you stand now in the twilight of this journey, you might reflect on what has been lost and what endures. The specific techniques of ancient agriculture, the shaduf and the ard, the sinampa and the terrace, these may be museum pieces superseded by modern technology. But the underlying principles, working with natural cycles rather than against them, maintaining soil fertility, managing water wisely, preserving crop diversity, these remain relevant and perhaps more urgent than ever. Let the twilight deepen now. Let yourself prepare for rest, carrying with you the images and wisdom gathered on this long journey through the fields of the ancient world. Closing reflection and legacy. You have walked a long way through time, from the first tentative plantings of wild grasses in the Fertile Crescent 10,000 years ago, through the vast irrigation systems of Mesopotamia, along the Nile's reliable flood, across the terraced mountainsides of China, through the floating gardens of the Aztecs, and among the olive groves of the Mediterranean. You have seen how humanity learned, slowly and patiently, to feed itself. The agricultural revolution was perhaps the most consequential change in human history. It made everything else possible. Cities, writing, art, science, philosophy, all the achievements and tragedies of civilization. But it came at a cost. Agriculture requires hard labor. It creates social hierarchies. It ties people to specific places. It makes populations vulnerable to famine when crops fail. The hunter-gatherer life it replaced was in many ways freer, more egalitarian, less precarious. Yet, there is no going back. Agriculture has transformed not just human society, but the planet itself. Much of the Earth's surface is now farmland. The great forests that once covered vast areas have been cleared. Rivers have been dammed and diverted. Plant and animal species have been domesticated, modified beyond recognition from their wild ancestors. The human population has grown from perhaps 5 million at the dawn of agriculture to nearly 8 billion today. This transformation is irreversible. What modern agriculture has gained in productivity, it has sometimes lost in wisdom. Ancient farmers understood that the soil must be fed if it is to continue feeding people. They returned organic matter to the fields, rotated crops, allowed land to rest. They maintained diversity as insurance against disaster. They worked within the limits of their environment rather than attempting to overcome those limits through sheer force. Modern industrial agriculture, particularly in the century following World War II, has often operated on different principles. The goal has been maximum production through chemical fertilizers, pesticides, mechanization, and genetic uniformity. The results in terms of yield per acre and per labor hour have been extraordinary. Famines that once killed millions have become rare. Food has become cheap relative to income for much of the world's population. But the costs have become increasingly evident. Soil degradation affects over a third of the world's agricultural land. Topsoil, which takes centuries to form naturally, is eroding far faster than it can be replaced in many regions. Chemical fertilizer runoff creates dead zones in oceans and lakes. Pesticides harm beneficial insects as well as pests. The loss of agricultural biodiversity. Thousands of crop varieties replaced by a handful of high-yield varieties creates vulnerability to disease and climate change. Agriculture accounts for roughly a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. Faced with these challenges, farmers, scientists, and policymakers are increasingly looking to the past for guidance. Ancient agricultural techniques, once dismissed as primitive, are being studied and sometimes revived. The principles of terra preta are being applied to create biochar soil amendments. Traditional water harvesting techniques are being restored in arid regions. Diverse population varieties are being developed to combine the resilience of traditional varieties with the productivity of modern ones. Integrated pest management draws on the companion, planting, and biological control methods of traditional agriculture. This is not simply nostalgia or romanticism. It is recognition that 10,000 years of agricultural experience, accumulated by countless farmers across diverse environments, contains valuable knowledge. The specific techniques may need adaptation to modern contexts, but the underlying principles, sustainability, diversity, working with ecological processes, remain sound. As you lie here now, letting the images of ancient fields drift through your mind, consider what those long-ago farmers have given you. Every grain of wheat, every grain of rice, every potato, every apple you have ever eaten is the product of their patient work. The domesticated plants and animals that feed you were created by them, transformed through countless generations of selection and care from wild species into the productive forms we know today. They also created something less tangible, but equally important. They developed a body of knowledge about how to live in partnership with the land. They learned which plants grow best in which soils, which season is right for planting, how to read the signs of weather and soil health, how to maintain fertility through the years and generations. This knowledge was passed down, parent to child, master to apprentice, through oral tradition and later through written texts, through songs and stories and proverbs, through the muscle memory of hands that have performed the same tasks year after year. Much of this knowledge has been lost, particularly in the developed world where few people now farm. But it is not entirely gone. It persists in traditional farming communities around the world. It is preserved in seed banks and agricultural museums and libraries. It is being rediscovered by researchers studying ancient agricultural sites. It is being practiced by the small but growing movement of farmers and gardeners seeking more sustainable approaches. The fields of the ancient world are gone now, buried under cities or eroded away or transformed by modern agriculture. The farmers who worked them have been dust for millennia, but their legacy endures in every cultivated field, in every bite of bread, in every harvest festival, in the fundamental fact that humanity knows how to feed itself through the partnership of human labor and the earth's fertility. As you drift towards sleep now, let yourself imagine one more scene. It is dawn. The air is cool and fresh. You stand at the edge of a field. It could be anywhere, any time. Perhaps it is the Fertile Crescent 10,000 years ago, or perhaps it is a farm in your own region today. A farmer walks out into the field carrying seeds. The soil has been prepared. The season is right. The farmer begins to plant, pressing each seed into the earth with practiced motion, covering it, moving on to the next. This is the oldest and most fundamental act of civilization, planting seeds in hope of harvest, entrusting the present to the future, participating in the great cycle of growth and decay and renewal that sustains all life. The farmer plants in hope but without certainty, knowing that success depends on rain and sun and 1,000 factors beyond human control, knowing that failure is always possible, yet planting anyway, because this is what must be done. The farmer plants, and you watch, and the sun rises higher, warming the earth. The farmer will return to this field many times in the coming months, to water, to weed, to check the plant's progress. And if fortune and skill combine favorably, there will be a harvest. Grain will be cut and gathered. Food will be secured for another year, and some seeds will be saved for next year's planting, continuing the cycle. This is the wisdom of the ancient farmers, passed down through 10,000 years. That life comes from the earth, that the earth must be tended with knowledge and care, that each generation must plant for the next, that we are part of the great web of life, not separate from it or above it. We eat what the earth produces, and when we die, we return to the earth, and the cycle continues. Let this image stay with you as you drift into sleep. The farmer in the field, seeds in hand, planting in hope, the sun rising, the earth waiting. This is where it all begins. This is the foundation of everything that came after. This is the gift of the ancient farmers to all who came after them. Rest now. Let the long journey through these ancient fields carry you gently into sleep. And if you have found peace and interest in this exploration through time, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to. Join us for more journeys through the forgotten wisdom of the past. There is so much more to discover. So many more stories waiting to be told. The field is planted, the seeds rest in darkness, waiting. Soon they will begin to grow, pushing up toward the light, drawing nourishment from soil and sun and water, transforming these elements into food and fiber and life itself. This is the ancient miracle, the transformation that agriculture makes possible, that has sustained humanity for 10,000 years and will, with wisdom and care, sustain us for thousands more to come. Sleep now and dream of green fields and golden grain, of terraced mountains and flowing canals, of patient farmers and fertile soil, of the ancient harvests that fed the world and the wisdom that made them possible. Let the rhythms of the seasons carry you, the cycle of planting and growth and harvest and rest. Let yourself be held by the great continuity of agricultural life, stretching back to the very beginning of civilization and forward to horizons we cannot yet see. The ancient farmers plant their seeds in the earth. The seeds sleep in darkness. And when the time is right, when the conditions are favorable, they wake and begin to grow. Life continues. The cycle turns, the harvest comes, and so it has been, and so it shall be. Rest well. The field is planted. The ancient wisdom endures, and you carry it with you now, a gift from 10,000 years ago, a connection to all who have worked the earth and drawn sustenance from it, a reminder of the fundamental relationship between humanity and the soil that feeds us. Sleep now. Let the whispers of time carry you gently into dreams. The ancient harvests are gathered, but their seeds remain, and in them, the promise of all future harvests. The wisdom is not lost, only waiting to be remembered. And as you rest, that remembering begins. A seed planted in your own mind, ready to grow when the time is right. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with the peace of well-tended fields and the satisfaction of honest labor rewarded with abundance. The ancient farmers did their work well, and we are all the inheritors of their patient wisdom. Rest in that knowledge and wake refreshed, carrying a little more understanding of how deeply we are connected to the earth and to all those who came before us, working the soil, planting seeds, gathering harvests, and passing on their knowledge so that we might eat and live and flourish. The journey through the ancient fields is complete. The wisdom has been shared. Now comes the time for rest, and for dreams of golden grain swaying in the wind, of green terraces climbing mountains, of dark, rich soil turned and ready for planting, of the eternal cycle of seasons and the patient work of farmers across all the ages of the world. Sleep well, traveler. The ancient harvests are safe. The wisdom endures, and tomorrow is another day, another season, another planting. For now, rest. You have walked far through time, and you have earned your repose. May the peace of the ancient fields settle over you like evening dew on growing plants, gentle and nourishing and right. The story is told. The wisdom is shared. The seeds are planted. Now comes the quiet and the waiting and the rest. Good night.